So, hello and welcome to another happiness class. This week we're talking about sex and why, because there are so many elements to what make us happy, and that certainly is one part of it. But it's a interconnected story. So, if you want to be good at sex, you have to be healthy in other aspects of your life. I do feel like my guest is trying to join in. I'm not sure what's going on there, but right now his screen is blank. But anyway, hopefully you'll join us shortly. And in the second half of the show, you can ask any questions you want. So let's get on with it. So I've written down a question to try to summarize what I think is worth talking about here. Why are we obsessed with sex? But any question I put down doesn't seem to quite do justice to what I think is important to talk about here. So first of all, it is important. Like, why has sex become so important to relationships that people feel like on Tinder and things like that, that's how they express themselves, and the key way in which they express themselves a lot nowadays. But the other side is like it's not. I'm not at all saying sex is a bad thing. That's a weird thing to say, right? Um, uh, it's what also I think is really important to understand is why has it become important, and has it become important at the cost of other things? So I think I have my guest joining in. Hey, Salim, good to see you. So we've just got
Hi
started.
everyone.
Hey, so let me just try to, yeah, so we just got started, and you can see hopefully on the screen what we're talking about, Salim. Thank you for joining us, appreciate it. So selfish people collect this. So I always try to go a really short answer to what's going on, um, or my answer, and it goes something like selfish people collect endlessly, forever unhappy. So that might give the impression that, sex is a bad thing, and that's completely wrong because in the second half, I'll be talking about why it's important and how you should be good at it. There are so many different angles I want to talk about when I talk about sex. Um, and yeah, so a couple of things I want to quickly mention is if you're not honest, so I think a lot of what I talk about begins with God, strangely, and people might not connect it. People often think of sex, being good at sex, or your relationships with other people as something like separate from everything else, and that would be a mistake. Like, for example, sex is about being kind. So you can't be kind only in bed and not the rest of your life. You are a person, and wherever you go, you are that person. It doesn't suddenly change in different circumstances. So, but where does it all begin with? What's the root of the kind of our I would say slightly one-sided obsession with sex at the cost of many other things like family relationships and deep relationships is our God awareness. So, what's God got to do with anything? So, when you forget kind of the wider purpose of life or your wider experience of life, I like to say, besides outside sex, family relationships, community relationships, and things like that, what you do, you get sucked into a very narrow experience of life. And also part of that narrow experience of life, which so when you're not doing charity work and so many other beautiful things that make your life whole, you start becoming materialistically orientated, and part of that is what you could be described as covetousness, or a hoarder or collector of things, and even people become things to be collected. So you might have heard of a trophy wife, etc. So people in the materialistic world become things, and they don't get treated very well if you're treated like a thing, because a thing can always be replaced, tossed away, and that's what happens in relationships, and lots of other bad things happen. So I'm going to try, that's one idea. I want to mention a few other quick ideas. So at the same time, on the other side, I want to say sex is a natural thing and it should be experienced in a healthy way. And if you experience it in a healthy way, you really experience it properly. And I would say very few people that I know seem to be experiencing sex anywhere near where they should be. And you say, how do I know? Well, first of all, I have private conversations with people, and but also it's really, if you start seeing through the lens I'm about to give you, as it were, you'll see it's really obvious that people are suffering in bed, as it were, in their relationships in bed. And that would be a very quick hint at how we're suffering is our inability to have like genuine conversations, feeling type conversations, expressing who we are, what we feel, and things like that. So when I was in the Middle East, a natural part of the conversation is "I love you." Right, that's how people express each other. Kissing each other on the cheek and stuff like that. Men kissing each other on the cheek. It's very kind of, there isn't so much distance between people, and if you don't have that, if you don't have connection, you're not going to have connection in the bed. It doesn't suddenly change. So sex, really good thing, really healthy, must do it. But religion is beautiful in that it guides it. So if you do it within the proper limits, it's healthy. If you do it outside those limits, for example, if you just do it for the sake of pleasure, for example, some people fight. Um, well, I'll probably go into it later on. Ricky Gervais is saying, you get pleasure up your ass, therefore, why shouldn't sex be through anal sex, for example? And then my answer roughly would be, you can get pleasure from itching your ears. Sometimes people put earbuds in there and they go, oh, it really feels comfortable. It doesn't mean you put your genitals in your ears. It doesn't make sense. So there's always kind of a limit to how things are done. Sex. So I know I'm going on a bit. I'm going to give Salim a chance in a second, but just want to kind of roughly get through some of the basic ideas. Sex obsession is partly due to the need to feel successful. People feel really empty, and so they want to. Let's say win people's love, and the only very limited way they can do that is they'll have sex with somebody, and that person will say, by kind of having an experience with them, they're indirectly saying that they love them and how they think that that person is really good in bed or whatever it is. And that kind of thing, that I had sex with X person who has blonde hair or red hair or black hair or black face or whatever it is, I kind of dominated that person. I've won that person, and that tick that box, and I have sex with another person, is that need, part of that need for obtaining people and feeling successful. And that, you will never feel successful in that way, because that's not uh, uh, that's part of materialism, and I'll talk about that in detail if you want, where you're always chasing, because whatever you get, it's, you get used to it and you're on to the next thing. And kind of the last thing I want to quickly go into is that narrowness of the human experience. So if you narrow your experience to your genitals or a few parts of your organs, you're not going to feel complete. And also, it's a really dark path to go down to, and you can see that in when you go to people who get into light porn, for example. Then because it's not satisfying after watching it a while, they need to go to more and more hardcore porn until it goes to things like pedophilia and things like that. And where you go to what I would call not just dark, but misappropriated feelings is a way. Like you're feeling, you want to get feelings, but you're not getting them, you're not getting connection with people, and you go down dark paths because you're narrowing your human experience. And the human experience is beautiful if you go out and do things like be kind to people and stuff like that. So a lot of talking done there. So I was going to give it to Salim, but I think maybe he's tending to his sheep. Something's happening. He's coming back. He's on his way. I was going to say, oh, over to you, Salim. And it's like I looked up and he disappeared. What happened? What's happening? Is your
So,
sheep
so what happened was
behaving?
that the children were taking over the internet bandwidth via gaming and YouTubing and watching movies and listening to music all at the same time while we're trying to do a live
Jeez.
YouTube stream. So
Yeah.
I had to get my priorities right.
Oh, were you the
And
kids? You were on the game. Oh, I get it. Now I get it.
no, no, no.
Sorry, go on.
So yeah, very interesting topic. I think that this is like clickbait. Why are we obsessed with sex for Muslims? I mean, it's like almost a taboo subject nowadays, although it didn't used to be for hundreds and hundreds of years. So why are we obsessed with sex? And I reckon it's because our magazines, our movies, sex sells. You know, if you see me, just in not wearing very much on the front cover of a magazine, you're going to want to buy that magazine, right? If you see me in a movie, or if you see somebody half clad, they're gonna. Sex sells basically. It's an innate human part of it's a part of our. It's in us to reproduce. It's human life.
Mm. So
But
it's a
just going to
fact.
back up.
Yeah. Go on, go on, go on, go on. 'Cause I'm
So I'm
gonna
just
try
going
to
to
know
back
what.
up a little bit.
Yeah. Go on. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to back up a bit because uh, sex. There's a number of areas to sex, like intimacy. We all want intimacy. We all want emotional connection. We all want closeness. We want to be caring, or we want to be loved. We want to share. We have this vulnerability. So that's all part of the intimacy side of sex. So that's number one. Number two is the sensuality side of things. So that is skin hunger. That is um, fantasies. That's enjoyment of one's body, enjoyment of other people's bodies, awareness. You get a sense of comfort. So that's sensuality. And then another key piece of the puzzle is your sexual identity. So that's your sexual orientation, your sense of maleness, your gender identity, basically. Um, and then finally, we've got the reproduction side, which is what you call sex. That last bit at the end, the sex, is a small piece of the puzzle, but important part of the puzzle. That's the physiology, that's the intercourse. And but all those previous things what I mentioned, they're critical as well. So we mustn't forget that's part of the puzzle. Why are we obsessed with sex? Because mostly, uh, there's pleasure in it.
Mm.
There's pleasure at that moment.
Okay, so yeah, there's some interesting points you gave just there, and I want to go through three of them. So there's intimacy, which is seriously lacking in modern Western or materialistic societies. So people feel really disconnected, and so you'll find that a lot of people have sex without the intimacy because it's kind of they're trying to get a shortcut to that intimacy. And so the more and this is also linked to so many elements of what's happening in society. So I would say uh, society becomes more sex the more lonely people are, because and I would not just what I would say because I've been researching this. Sex becomes more part of your relationship the more disconnected and unhappy you are in your relationship. It shouldn't be such a big part. It's not a bad part, and in fact, even if it's a big part, it's probably a rubbishly experienced part, is what I'm saying. So if you're in a bad relationship, it's going to be a greater part of your relationship because there's less of your relationship to be seen. And then on top of that, you're really bad at sex because you don't know how to connect. And this is a wider problem in society. So people are paying for sex more, and it's even the kind of relationships people are in on Tinder and things like that. It's more about sexualizing yourself. So um, it becomes almost the only part of many relationships, and they have sex people get bored and then they go to the next relationship. So intimacy is really important and it's lacking, and that's why sex is becoming so important to relationships. And it also means because there's lack of intimacy, people are having really bad sex. So I don't want to just talk about how things are bad. I want to very quickly talk about how they can be improved. So if you really want to improve your sex and your ability in sex, just need to be kinder and more understanding and more expressive generally in your life. Another thing is sex sells, is what Salim said. And it's what if you see something portrayed on TV lots of times, you start believing that's exactly the only thing that's important, and you start believing everybody else believes that because nobody else says anything otherwise. And finally, and it's also to do with your environment. If you see really wholesome family environments where people are wearing more clothes, you kind of start valuing that. But if you only see naked people all the time, you will value that and you think that is important. We are very much affected by our environment. And finally, people are just not getting enough sex, because Tinder doesn't mean you're getting more sex. It actually means, through the statistics, it means that most, like, the 0.1% are getting all the sex and most people are not getting sex. And that's statistically true. So there's always so many things, and we've already run out of time on that topic. Do join in the conversation. We could always backtrack or something like that. But the next question is very much related, and we can kind of talk about, answer anything you felt like was worth answering from the previous question in this question as well. So what is the recipe for amazing sex? And as usual, I'd like to give a really short answer to get us going. And actually, this is kind of what's missing so badly in society. Generosity unlocks gratefulness and starts positivity loops. And so, without me going into it too much straight away, maybe I would just say for now is the reason why people have such bad sex. And I talk to people, like, for example, they'll say, like, a friend of mine would say, like, oh, I struggle to last like 10 seconds. Okay. Is because they do not value what they have. It's really easy not to value what you have. And if you are generally a generous person, like you're always giving, 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 you start feeling really lucky in every aspect of your life. Like, if you're not feeling lucky in all aspects of your life, you're not suddenly going to feel lucky with the wife that you have. You're always going to think the grass is greener on the other side. That's just that's an automatic sort of reaction. People who are not generous are selfish, and selfish people are always trying to say, if only I had this, if only I had that. And then the never ending loop of searching for happiness. But if you're a generous person, you're creating positivity loops, which is, first of all, you feel lucky, and the second of so you're lucky and you appreciate your wife, and you therefore have a good, you enjoy having sex with your wife. But also, because you're kind and whatever, your wife is obviously going to be nicer to you back. And so that's just the beginning of an answer. Any thoughts, Salim?
Yeah. Okay. Here's might be news to everybody, but the best, if you're a woman, the best sex to have is sex with a Muslim.
Okay.
You heard it here first. It hasn't heard that for a long time, but the best sex you'll ever have is going to be with a Muslim, and I'll tell you why. It's because a Muslim man, his job is to make sure he's giving, and that means that the lady in it, or his partner, needs to be satisfied to the max before he helps himself. you know I think it's probably as decent a way I can put it,
Hmm.
uh, without getting abuse subsequently later on. But yeah, because I think for great sex you need to have anticipation. You need to be with somebody who's going to give as opposed to take and be done really quickly. Um, in Islam, it's an act of charity. Sex is an act of charity if you fulfill your partner first. So it's what we call sadqa, it's called charity. Um, and the best sex is when there's no guilt associated with it, because it's you're not, what they're called, you're not sinning in the eyes of God. It's all good. So that's when you are in a married relationship and sex is with mutual consent within that relationship. There's no guilt, and basically party time. So if I was you, find a Muslim man, and that's the recipe for amazing sex.
Cool. Yeah, and so I would agree. Either marry a Muslim man or a Jewish man or somebody whose prophet guided them on sex. So it's like sex is not some random thing. It's like you've got spiritual teachers saying this is how you should do it and you should do it really well. For example, and just in line with what Salim was saying is so in Islam, the job of a man is to make sure his wife is satisfied. So literally, I'll give you a quote from Prophet Muhammad. He said, "Do not begin intercourse until your wife has experienced the same desire like you have desired that you experience, and do not fulfill your desire before she does." Right? So you're going out of your way to make sure your wife is getting an orgasm, right? Now, on the other hand, the person I was talking to who said, I was basically going at it like a pneumatic drill sort of thing and lasting all of 10 seconds. When you do that, you're totally focusing on your own feelings. And when you're totally focused on your own feelings, you're going to ejaculate or orgasm really quickly if you're a man. Now, as a man, you're supposed to be, and this is what psychologists say women like, you're supposed to be dominating the situation. Women like to be dominated. So it doesn't mean, by the way, when you dominate, it doesn't mean you don't care, but you are controlling. So you can control how fast you go in sexual intercourse. And when you do it so you're pleasing your wife. So foreplay, for example, is very much important in Islam. And if you're not doing that, this is part of generosity, right? If you're not generous, okay, then a whole cascade of things are going to start happening. If you're generally not generous, your wife, next time she comes to have sex with you, she knows what to expect, which is this guy is just going to do it as if I'm not even there, right? And I'm not going to have an great experience. And therefore, you're not going to have a great experience because she's not enjoying herself. She'd be like, when's this thing going to be over? Right? So there's so many things. And it all just starts with simple rules, which is in Islam, it says paradise or happiness is the home of the generous, which is completely the opposite of what we learn in individualistic society. It's all about me, 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 me. And because everything's about me, 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 you think you're going to be really happy, but actually, all the statistics prove that we're rapidly getting depressed and unhappy and miserable and all this kind of stuff. So that general unhappiness that you're finding in society also comes down back to bed when you're not generous, you're not kind, you're not going out of your way to be nice to everybody. Then you're not going to be kind to your wife either, and you're not going to experience much good sex. So when I said about I think I've heard some Jewish rabbis talking about how to be good in bed. And so, if anybody's giving you wise words about that rather than what you see on TV, which are not wise words, which is just like, I don't know, it's fake sex. It's not what human beings are really like. Like what usually happens in a Hollywood movie, they've just killed all the bad guys and they should be in shock and suddenly they're all making out. Like that doesn't really happen, does it? Like you'd be pretty scared if you just killed a few people. You won't be in the mood for sex, right? So Hollywood movies are not very realistic, and if you got a rabbi or an imam telling you how to do it better, more with a bit more wisdom, and hopefully it makes more sense what they're saying, then you probably get better at sex. So I agree. If you want good sex, have it with a Muslim man or a Jewish man or somebody who's spent time really thinking about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's a chapter Al-Maida of the Quran, which is the dictated word of God, that is chapter 4, verse 20, and it says, "Consort with kindness with your wives." So that's like clear instruction. Clearly, I'm not. I mean, I don't speak for myself when I got to work on my kindness. Apparently, so she tells me, but yeah, so that's it really. Just I agree with you that kindness is the key to unlocking amazing sex.
Sure, yeah. I'm not sure if I'm thinking about the right verse, but there is a beautiful verse which, in a very subtle way, talks about how you should have sex with your wife, which is your wife is, yes, she's sort of fertile ground for your seeds, as it were, when to have children, but the way you approach your wife is described as tilth, which means basically something you treat well before you go to, right? So if you're trying to grow some vegetables, you have to take out the weeds, you have to treat it kindly and well, you know, do everything you can to make sure that it's, I don't know, healthy and happy and all that kind of stuff. And then you go to your wife in that respect. And then there's also some other subtle messages that the Quran puts forward. So it also, for example, I can't remember the exact, there's, was it chapter? Let me see. Yeah, let me check the verse if it's the same verse I'm talking about. Chapter 7, verse 189, creating covers any. Okay, and so there's another verse that basically suggests, so in Islam, we don't focus too much on positions,
It's
but there is a position that's worth mentioning, which is the man on top. And why would that be the ideal position? Maybe it's a finishing position, is because that's where all most of the erogenous parts are. So you can imagine what that means, right? We're trying to keep it not too far over 18 rating this episode, but also, as I said before, psychologists have said women like to be dominated, so that's a dominating or controlling position, but also always do things within limits. That's what in Islam and all religious teachings are about, getting your natural urges within the limits. So you must be dominating, but within limits where you're understanding and listening and feeling what your wife wants and serving your wife and making sure, as I said earlier on, that she experiences the same level of joy that you do, at least. So, yeah. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, there's two things that
Yeah.
arise. The first one is the legality in Islam. Is one of the you're meant to get lashes if you're an adulterer, or if you sleep with someone outside of marriage. So you're meant to get lashes. You get lashed. So that's corporal punishment, which means it shows the how, and it's very rare. I can't even remember any other uh, activity that you get lashes for, and that's written in the Quran. So it just indicates how serious it is in the eyes of God not to be married. So I just want to mention about that legality side. And the
Mm.
second thing is when we're all trying to find relief. We all want to find a partner. Um, but there's a verse, and it says, "Tell the faithful men to cast down their looks and to guard their private parts, and tell the faithful women to cast down their looks and guard their private parts, not to display their charms, except which is obvious, and put their scarves over themselves." So that's chapter 24, verses 30. And the reason I mention that is because this word comes up, which is jihad, which is the self control. You're meant to control yourself, control your passions, control your impulses. And what that verse is saying is like, don't watch porn, don't check out girls, like, and be open about it. It says control your um, glances, basically, and yeah, it's
Mm,
just shows some self
yeah.
control.
And yeah, and it's not like God makes up random rules. It's for your own good. So if you look everywhere, you're basically teasing yourself and you start, so your brain is plastic, which means you can easily change your mind about what looks good. So you might love your wife's nose, but then you start looking at some other lady's nose and other parts, and you'll be like, why isn't she like that? Because your brain starts adjusting to that. So you're basically making it impossible for you to have good sex if you're looking at porn. And statistically you will see that that is, of course, it's going to be true. So controlling your gazes and like what you're looking at and what you're thinking about when you're looking at people is really important. um yeah, and why the lashes? I suppose it's really important to, again, Islamic teachings and all religious teachings are not random. It's like God doesn't want you to ruin your own relationships. And like you to know the severity of that. Nowadays, it doesn't seem to matter if you're in a marriage or not. And because of that, people are really harming themselves emotionally and ruining their sex lives and everything in the long term because they treat sex like you can just do it and you can do it detached, and you're going to have mental problems, definitely have mental problems if you have sex with somebody and you think you can just walk away with them and have no feelings for them. That's just not how human beings work. So I just thought that was worth explaining. So let's go on to the other interesting questions we've got today, which is, again, I've already kind of started this topic, which is um, why does God have boring rules? It's like, why can't you just have sex with everybody? Or why can't we have homosexual sex and whatever, right? And a short answer I like to give is, is psychologists know God's rules lead to happiness. And you're like, oh, how do you psychologists know that? Well, first of all, check it on YouTube. They'll tell you that religion, if you are religious, you're far more likely to be happy than if you're not religious. That's one thing. Okay, there's loads of videos. This is kind of like what I talk about on these shows are kind of the ABCs of psychology that most people don't know, and most people are going the opposite direction of happiness, which is why they're struggling with happiness. And all I'm doing is kind of putting in front of you like really well-known things known by psychologists but not known by the average person, which is why the average person is so miserable. So God doesn't really give boring rules. It's just that you don't really get them. And just if you study it a little bit, Google's out there, you'll be surprised what are the benefits of so many things. So um, what did I feel like? Is that your side or my side? I feel like I'm gonna try closing. No, no, okay. Sorry. I keep hearing beep beep. So all right. So
Sorry.
so I thought it was my WhatsApp or something I'd opened. Okay, sorry. It's your WhatsApp. Stop WhatsApping during my show. Anyway,
I
I
will do. I will do.
sorry. Okay, anyway, so for example, Ricky Gervais, I do like him in many ways because I get a lot of inspiration about the problems or the questions I need to answer. So Ricky Gervais is a famous atheist, and one thing he said is, why did God make men's G spot up their ass and then forbid homosexuality? Okay, and so this is one of those things that if you study it a little bit, you kind of go, oh, okay. Um, there's a reason. So that you can experience pleasure in all sorts of ways. And by the way, I'm going to do a thing that I've never done before, which is a bit of editing. So when I play this video, I'm sorry, when I take these live streams and I cut them up into pieces with individual questions. In the beginning of it, I'm going to put Ricky Gervais's little comedy sketch about that. And so yeah, so look out for that. But anyway, get so generally speaking, if you look into nature, all pleasure is very specifically designed for a purpose to encourage us to do things that our body needs. So we need to reproduce. And if you think about it, if there was no pleasure in reproduction and all you got was lots of hard work taking care of kids, yeah, spending loads of money, most people wouldn't bother doing it, and the human race would be dead. So it's so important to have sex. It's so important to reproduce that sexual pleasure is one of the most kind of highest levels of pleasure that you can achieve. But the same goes with all sorts of other pleasures and pain, by the way. So if you're doing something wrong, like you bash your knee, if you didn't feel pain, people would normally just carry on and say, oh, it's only bleeding. I don't care about bleeding. Bleeding's not a bad thing. But now, since you associate bleeding with pain, you kind of know that it's a bad thing. So pleasure and pain are very specifically designed. And if you look at, for example, um, the if you I think people have forgotten somehow, even in this age of science, how amazingly intricate human beings are. We are the most advanced human beings. Our eyes are better than any robot out there. We kind of understand how our brains work. Our brains are just incredible, right? So same with our reproductive systems. They're so complicated, it's amazing. If you just start YouTubing it, like how the sperm is even created, how it goes on its journey towards the egg, and how it gets it, it's insane how complicated it is, right? So there's pleasure related to this very intricate design. And if we forget that there's a design and we're amazingly designed, okay, and we misuse that amazing design, it's like taking, I don't know, taking this phone, right? Now, phones are a bit more, I'm not sure if this example is going to be great, but phones are getting increasingly more waterproof. But because it's high tech, I have to be careful how I treat my phone. I've put, a cover on it and stuff like that, and I don't drop it in water and stuff like that. It's the same with a human being. If you misuse it, it will go wrong. And there's tons of evidence. So if you start having anal sex, especially homosexual sex, you are going to suffer. And all the evidence is out there, AIDS, STDs, whatever. When I donate blood, it's like, oh, have you had homosexual anal sex? Like, that's one of the boxes. If I tick that, I probably won't be able to donate blood. So it's not like religious people make these things up. If you misuse, pleasure is designed for a purpose. If you misuse that purpose, just because you can feel pleasure in a certain way doesn't mean you should uh, so if you have pleasure, it's for a specific purpose. So if you, for example, I don't know, have an itch in your ear, and just because some people put cotton bud in there and they clear out the wax and they quite enjoy that. My mum likes that, right? Imagine she goes, oh right, oh, it feels really good here. I think I'm going to start having sex through my ears. Just because you feel pleasure through your ears doesn't mean you should have sex with it. It's like everything isn't sex. It's just I've done quite a lot of talking. I could go on, but give you a chance to jump in. Or have you any thoughts about what I've said, or disagree with any of it?
Yeah, so obviously I disagree. Why does God have boring rules? I think that life is hard. Life can be a struggle. But God has made religion easy. He's made it easy, and it's us culturally that have made it hard. Getting married, it's easy. Anyone can read anyone's wedding, uh, appoint anyone as a man and wife. It's easy to get divorced, no biggie. But this big, we've turned it into a huge culturally drama about having a big wedding and so on and so on. So we've made it hard or boring, if you call it. Um, why does God have rules? I would say, and it's about the scales of at the end of your life, at the end of your uh, activities. It's a summary of your conduct, of your thoughts. Have you been righteous? Um, he has social. There's laws that pertain to social. Our responsibilities to our parents, being honest, being true, doing the good things, being charitable, like you say. Whether it's referencing fasting or prayers, there are these rules, but I wouldn't say they're boring and I wouldn't say they're hard. I think they are in tune with the natural world and the natural as humans. Um, and obviously, in Islam, the greater good is more important than the individual good. So, whilst we value an individual, the greater good comes first. So,
Mm.
so I don't think God has boring rules. And in our legal code, we have punishments for those that break the rules, and they may be sent to institutions to reform them. So we have rules. God has rules. There's rules for war. There's rules for at home, like we talked about just now. Rules for bedroom rules. I mean, rules have to exist, and these are the rules that we dictated to by God.
Sure, yeah. I mean, if you open up a self-help book and it said the rules are there are no rules about, I think I copied that from something. I don't know. What is that? Cage fighting or something, but maybe not. But the point is, if it was an empty book, nobody would buy that self-help book. They're looking for rules. People are looking for rules, and often the best rules are the most boring looking ones. Okay, so there's a great TED talk. I love my TED talks, and they were like, the most exciting people look really boring on the surface. So if you look at Steve Jobs doing, like, creating really amazing things, but how does he look? He follows these rules will look really boring, like, oh, I'm just going to wear a black top and jeans every single day. And that's because so he could focus on the things he thought was important. So he made up his own rules about how to really experience life, rather than spending all his time on the mundane or unimportant things, which is like, you know what you're going to wear. Like, you channel that energy into something great, and that's what these God rules are. The God rules, they're given because if we went according to our short term, maybe you could call it animalistic desires, right? Where you're just thinking about tomorrow, then what you do is you sacrifice all the amazing things you could have. For example, you could say, taking care of kids, that is so annoying. I'm just going to have kids and then toss them away and let them do whatever they want. But then when you grow up, you're going to be really miserable. Okay, nobody's going to take care of you, and they're going to treat you really badly as well, and everybody's going to treat everybody else badly. So these God rules. They seem boring on the surface, but a tiny bit of research, okay, and a tiny bit of persistence will make you realize that you get to experience life to the much greater depth and breadth by following those rules. It's like, why are we so boring that we go to school for 12, 10 years? Because maybe by the end of it, you learn so much cool stuff that you can do amazing things. But if you didn't bother studying, if you couldn't be bothered to study for more than one day because more than one day would be too boring, then you would just basically, you wouldn't have the internet and hardly anything cool would ever happen. So God rules, in short, they look really boring, but they're really awesome. They make life amazing. And this is not just me saying it. Countries where they practice those things. So I love going to the Middle East where they don't 100% practice all those God rules, as it were, but because they're like family orientated, you can go out in the evening and all the kids will be playing with all the other kids, and people are just relaxed and happy. They're wearing boring clothes, like the women are covered up, but when I go there, I feel so much more connected. Like, the ladies who are wearing boring clothes will say my brother, and I'll say my sister, and people are a lot more connected with each other. And just because they trust each other, because they know that their relationships are not based on how they look, because they're all reasonably covered. So there's so many things I could just go into, but yeah, the rules look boring on the surface. It's just like science is boring on the surface until you study it for a bit more than a day. Any thoughts?
Uh, yeah, I mean, even in Britain, we have rules around relationships. For example, if I've got or if somebody's got a girlfriend, then generally it's frowned upon for somebody else to, you know, spend like have a
Hit on
relationship
them
with
straight
them.
away. Like if
Yeah,
I was,
you know,
if
there's certain rules around
yeah,
relationships, even though they don't might not be married, and they may be boyfriend girlfriend, but the rules they might have decided set their ground rules as well. We're not exclusive yet. We can see other people until they set those boundaries for themselves to say, right now we're going to be an exclusive relationship. So um, yeah, we all have. There are these unwritten rules in relationships.
yeah. It's really interesting you even mentioned that. I mean, I'm not going to go into too much, but the Will Smith situation and his open marriage and how mental he's going has become really apparent. So people are free to experiment with their own rules, but all the statistics say that amazingly, the religious rules seem to work the best. So you can, go and check up with psychologists and they'll tell you that. But anyway, so yeah, feel free to experiment and figure out your own rules, but you'll find out the God rules are the best. So is everything God's fault? Um, and again, this is kind of inspired by a conversation between me and you, but also stuff I've been watching from Ricky Gervais, where he said, like, does God, if everything is in God's control, then that means God is the one who gives aids to children in Africa. And again, I'm gonna try to make my videos a little bit popular. I'm gonna stick his video before I even start talking on the edited version, and maybe more people will watch it and kind of understand what I'm talking about there as well. But anyway, so the short answer. Oh, where is my short answer? Um, let's copy paste that. Everything's within a plan that allows choice. Okay, so you do have free will. Okay, if there wasn't free will, there wouldn't be such a thing as good or bad. How can there be anything that's good if everything you had to do was dictated by God? That means, yeah, it's like God says, "Give that sweet to that poor kid, otherwise I'll kill you." Then it's not actually kindness to give sweet to that kid. It's like you were forced to. So free will is necessity for good and bad to happen, and to give a short version of why we're, according to religion, why we're even here, or at least in Islam, it's this never ending journey towards beauty. And beauty, the only real, I mean, the most meaningful sense of beauty is good action rather than, your good looks, which are only sort of a weird chemical reaction you get that is ingrained in your biology. Like, why is that nose really good looking? It's because somehow it's imprinted in your biology. It's not really what it's not an amazing idea of what beauty is, right? So yeah, everything's within uh there's a plan, and there's space for you, there's wiggle room for you to misbehave within that plan. But I was talking to Salim earlier on, and I'm not sure if what Salim's opinion is, but he was watching a bit of Star Wars, and I'm a big fan of Star Wars, so generally I agree, but I don't take it as kind of like the I don't take the words of Yoda as exact rules to live by, but quite close. Um, and somebody, either Yoda or somebody quite as wise as Yoda, might have said something along the lines of, everything is as it should be. Now, I did try to look for the quote, I couldn't find it. Who said it? Which Jedi said it? Was he
It was the
dying?
knights. It was the knights of the Kyber crystal. Is it the Kyber crystal? Um, Star Wars fans will know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But the knights of the Kyber crystal, one of them was a believer, and he said, "The force is around. I am part of the force, and the force is with me." He also
Hmm.
said that everything is as it should be, and it relates to a word that's quite often used by lots of Muslims called mashallah. It means by the grace of God, or in my translation of it is everything is as Allah wills it. So um, if you forgive me, just indulge me for a moment.
Sure.
So the rule is everything God's fault? Yes, in that there are rules of nature, there's rules of matter, there's rules of science, where Islam is the word of God, science is the work of God, and obviously directed evolution is forms part of that. So what I'm saying is that if well, forget if God exists, we're well past that. God is super conscious. He is more than aware, and beyond the number of stars times intelligent than you and I. He's active, he's alive, he's hearing, he's listening to us. So every leaf that drops, every creature that gets fed, insect in the ground, God knows it. The superconscious universe knows it. Um, so you're on when we're playing these video games, you're on a kind of a directed path. Yeah, you can go over here and shoot some people and go over there and play some games, but you cannot defy the laws of gravity, you cannot defy the laws of matter. So you are on rails, what they call. We're on rails. There's a limit to what we can do. We can't just defy gravity and just walk into the air. And yeah, so everything is as Allah wills it, or as God wills it, as the universe wills it. Whatever your name of God is, the one superpower that's running the show, and and is active, and everything is as.
That's pretty rude, Cat. Do you see Salim sticking his backside up to the camera? Gosh, have some respect. Anyway, I'm still doing it. He's ignoring me. She's ignoring
Put
me.
it down. Put
I
it
think she's
down.
making. I think she's making a point now to ignore me. Or is it she or he?
She.
See, how did I know? How did I know? 50-50. Eh? Anyway, so I think the thing we were disagreeing with, because I like to find some point of disagreement, Salim, on the phone the other day, was you were saying, is
Hold on. Did you
everything?
say? Are you saying? You saying no? Everything's not God's fault. I'm saying yes, it is.
No, I'm trying to find the point of disagreement. And the point of
Okay.
disagreement when we were on the phone was you were saying you're one thing is this is quite subtle, right? I'm agreeing with you that everything is God's fault, right? Because God has control, he can allow everything. But is everything as it should be is another question. Like, or as God would like it. Or so God will like you to do good things. Okay, God would like people, little kids, not to have AIDS, but their parents made certain decisions, often extramarital affairs and stuff like that, right? Or also the other issues. Okay, I'm not saying that's the only way, but that's the general cause for AIDS, right? So God would like you to be the best as you can, but gives the opportunity not to. So there are rails, but there's like amongst those rails is like turn right or turn left. You choose. Good or bad, you choose. So, but God allows those two options. So God is in control of the two options. God created those two options, but you still get to choose them. So what I mean to say is that if we simply, or maybe if we're over simplistic, then we're basically going to end up insulting God, because when Ricky Gervais quite legitimately says if everything is God's fault, then giving AIDS to innocent children is also God's fault. And we just say, yeah, that's fine. We shouldn't be too comfortable with that. We should at least try to explain it. Because if I said, Salim, have you been giving AIDS to little children again? And you said, yeah, yeah, I'm quite, yeah. And I'll be like, oh, that's great. Well done, Salim. No, you wouldn't. So we should also have that kind of feeling to fight for God, as it were, even though God doesn't need us, but like enough respect for God to say, you know what, you know, God has given and made an amazing world, giving loads of opportunity to do amazing, beautiful things. And then you focus on this one bad thing or these few bad things, Ricky Gervais. You're focusing on like bad things that are result of human action. Okay, who chose to, out of all the amazing, beautiful things you could do, they did that, right? Maybe you shouldn't just blame God, but like kind of look to human beings to fix their behavior. Is an answer I'd give.
So David Attenborough said he didn't believe in God because of congenital defects. So these are children that are born because of genetic, whether it's sickle cell anemia or other, but you're born with defects. But on the other hand, God says in the Quran that look around, you won't find any flaws in creation. So how do you, what would you say to David?
Right, so that's interesting. So flaws in creation. So one thing is that um, this is hard to prove, but this is what I've heard, and it makes some sense. Is that the flaws, you can have all sorts of, for example, if you, after Hiroshima, for example, the nuclear bomb, um, many generations had all sorts of defects in their children. And if you take all sorts of terrible drugs or bad food, it can affect what happens to your generations down the line. And so there's a number of issues with that. Is like, oh, that's a bit unfair. Why should somebody else be affected by your actions? Well, no man is an island. We're all affecting each other, and it's part of kind of the dynamics of what makes us like. If we only harmed ourselves and we didn't harm other people, then nobody else would make us accountable. Like you know, like I don't know if a child would ever say, "Why did you mess up my life by taking X, Y, and Z," or not looking into you know your actions. So that could be one answer. We don't know the full extent of science, but we do know that on the whole things are pretty immaculately designed. I mean, incredible. So pretty immaculate design. That's such an underestimate of how amazing things are. And so for, let's say, what's his name, Richard Attenborough, after being the guy who looks at all the amazing things he does more than we do, okay, and to look at all of that, and then he sees one black dot on a massive white piece of paper, and he just focuses on that black dot and says, right, I don't believe in God because of that. I mean, that's just completely dishonest. It's like, first of all, he knows better than a lot of people how amazing and how intricate and how fantastically designed everything is. And he knows that if he sees a robot coming out of a factory, he knows that somebody made that. So he knows that things are being created and amazingly designed, but he takes the one opportunity to ignore God's design and says, look, that thing that I don't really understand because I'm not a scientist, I don't fully understand it, and I claim that is a fault in the design. That's pretty lame.
Okay, interesting response. So
Yeah.
uh, mutations in the DNA result in survival of the fittest in the Darwin's theory. I mean, obviously, we believe in directed evolution, but back to mutations in DNA. For example, my parents might have diabetes, and then I get past diabetes because it's genetic, it's hereditary.
To some extent,
Um,
yeah.
and so there are many things that are passed on, and eye color and so on. But all I would say is that if I get diabetes or if I have congenital defects, it's not a flaw. It's part of the plan.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to, for me, that's quite pretty hard to explain because I can't say I know the full design of everything. All I know
Yeah.
is that when I do look at the intricate
So
design of things generally, so I'm kind
yeah,
of
I was just
impressed
on
by
the
it.
bell
Yeah,
curve. On the bell curve of
yeah,
creation,
yeah.
there will always, most people are in the middle, but there will be the extremities of the bell curve where people will have you know obscure and uh, not flaws, but that's where variety takes place. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Jazakallah. I really appreciate that. It was really interesting as usual. That was a pretty hard question at the end, so I'm gonna practice or study a bit more about that. But generally, that was hopefully that was really helpful to viewers in some ways in appreciating. The first half was about our relationships with each other, and if people can just take away that they should be generous and kind to each other, so many of our problems will be solved. And we should get away from this individualism that's harming us so much. And yeah, hopefully there's some good takeaways there, really simple ideas. Thank you so much, Salim. I really appreciate you taking time out, kicking your kids off the computers for me. And thank you, everybody else, for watching the show. Press that like button. Hopefully, you'll promote the show to other people and subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. That's me sounding like a proper YouTuber. Peace be upon you. Till next week. I haven't pressed the end stream yet. I thought we